Welcome to Garden Architecture. I'm Haig Safarian. How do you deal with a 40-foot drop on your property? Well, terracing, of course. Today we'll view an architect's backyard where 3 distinct gardens have been created to take full advantage of this changing grade.
And I'm William Anderson. Our guest on this episode would like to recapture some of the romance of her honeymoon in Bali. We're going to visit a warehouse that stores East Asian furniture in order to find something appropriate for her garden.
And I'm Mariel Bradley. Haven't you always wanted a station where you can seed plants, pot flowers, and store all your garden necessities? Well, this week we'll be creating a functional potting stand with a place for everything you'll ever need.
With a 40-foot drop from the house to the bottom of the lot, Brian Hunt relied on terraces and retaining walls to create 3 distinct gardens out of one long, steep back lot. Brian, you're admittedly not a horticulturist.
No, that's true. My prime interest is design rather than growing plants.
So tell us a bit more about your background then.
Well, I'm an architect. I trained as an architect in the UK, and I practiced as an architect, and then I shifted into academe, and I've been a university professor now for quite a time.
Now, generally speaking, there is a huge grade drop here between one end of the garden and the back end. You've managed to terrace this down into different levels. Where did that whole idea come from?
Well, if you're going to have a sloped garden, if you want to not have everything wash away, either you've got to fill it with plant material or you terrace it. To make it more usable, the idea of terracing started to emerge. There was a hint of terraces already in it. There were some areas of banks without retaining walls. So bit by bit, I started putting retaining walls. So everywhere there's sort of dialogue between plant material and built material. And sometimes plant material is looking like built material. As, for instance, the cedar hedge is trimmed very carefully so it looks like a wall. It feels like a wall.
It certainly gives you the privacy
and
as well.
It acts like a wall, yes, as privacy and in terms of defining the space. Contrast it to the other side, it's enclosed with a fence, but the fence itself is disguised by plant material growing over it. This particular one here in the corner, a pyracantha, it's an evergreen shrub, and we've trimmed it to a pure cubic form here as part of the whole geometrical design. And what it does is define the end of this space and also set up the route for the path. And the one beyond it, the frame, with the wisteria growing over it. That also signals the path and also the point at which the path turns at right angles. It also sets up a space to go through so that you're conscious of going out of one space and into another.
Brian, I noticed the planting on that first terrace there. It's actually more vegetables and herbs.
That's right. Now we have a whole vegetable garden up there. We like to get our produce going as much as we can, and there it's reasonably accessible to the house. We can get at it quickly. But we do believe that vegetables should not be only utilitarian. They must be decorative as well.
Well, there certainly is a lot of textures and colors that you can incorporate into the landscape. Now, this appears to be quite an elaborate little tea house here. It has some interesting dimensions to it. Was it intended to be in this spot?
Well, yes, it was. It became here partly because there was a space next to that compost heap which needed to be filled, but also because it defined the space. And once again, I was looking at getting the spaces defined as clearly as possible. But it's made out of recycled materials. We found the doors and windows here in the neighborhood and people taking apart their glazed porches and so on. So bit by bit, we collected them up. And they are, in fact, from different porches, and so don't quite match, but it doesn't matter too much.
Oh, what a great idea. So you actually assembled this all yourself?
Yes, this one I did, and it was a great pleasure, bit by bit, putting all these bits together. Since I was working with traditional elements anyhow, I thought it would be appropriate to work with the same sort of details. So the shape of the gable up here is exactly the same detail as on the main house, and indeed it's a very common detail on a lot of the houses around here of that period.
Brian, this last terrace here, it actually goes down into a number of different levels. Was that intentional?
It was inevitable, it was so steep. We've got a 1-in-2 slope in this last little bit, so we had to do a lot of terracing. So we've got 4 levels of terrace just in this particular section here. This is the smallest in scale of all the sections. It's our third garden, what we call the rockery garden. And once again, it's defined by the cedar hedge there, in this case the greenhouse and potting shed this side, 2 fences each side, grown over as ever. This is one of our productive sides. That's a blackberry you see up there, cropping very well. We've got herbs, mint, currants in there too.
How many years has it taken to bring the garden to this level?
Well, it's probably about 25 years in all, but let's say the progress was very slow at certain times, and in recent years it's perhaps speeded up. That's particularly since my wife has been living with me, and she's a great gardener.
You feel that the garden is almost at that point now where you're happy with it, or is there still more to come?
Oh no, there's lots to come. We have major ideas for the top. We want to change the border where the plants are, which we feel is not satisfactory. We hope to make that a little more dynamic on that side, in contrast to the stiffer formal side on the other. Some of the connections through here we'd like to improve a bit. Right now we're working on the outside and the front garden, which are the sort of further extensions of this, and we would like to get these themes of the garden working more to the 2 outside places where we relate to the outside.
Well, Brian, thank you so much for sharing your garden with us here today.
You're very welcome.
Join us after the break. We're going to go shopping for some exotic garden furniture, so stay tuned. Furniture to remind her of her trip. Muriel, this garden's beautiful. I can't imagine what you have us here for.
Well, I love the garden actually, and I love this area in the shade, and I'd really like to have a place where I can sit and read a book.
Okay, like a little quiet area.
Yeah,
okay.
Just to enjoy the shade under the trees.
Yes, because they're so beautiful. Wonderful.
Yeah, it's a nice area.
Okay, now what kind of a style are you thinking of for this back area?
Well, when we went to Bali for honeymoon, my husband and I fell in love with Indonesian furniture, and I'd love to have, you know, that style out here. I have it already a little bit in the house, and love to bring it out.
Okay. Well, you know, I know of a warehouse where they stockpile a lot of Southeast Asian furniture for indoors and outdoors, so I'm sure we can probably find some pieces there that might sort of rekindle the romance of the back garden here for you. So what we're going to do is we're going to go there and shop around, see what we can find, bring some pieces back, and then we'll test them on you.
Perfect. Sounds great.
Okay. This is what you can expect to see if you decide that you want to go off to a warehouse to find objects for your garden. Furniture's piled up, there's different materials, we've got some metal, some stone, some wood. It's a feast for the eyes. What we're going to do is wander around and see what we find that's appropriate to today's garden. You can start seeing how there's different styles that probably come from different countries. This is like a classic English garden. This is more Chinese. I don't know, these bird cages are pretty nice. Funny thing. Sherry, these are the things we've isolated, and we've got some questions for you on some of them. Now, the first thing that I'm going to ask you about are these logs that are carved out. What were they used for? They're quite beautiful, but I'm at a bit of a loss on what they are.
These are originally grain and rice storage containers.
Oh, okay.
And they would have a lid on them, and that's why these pegs would hold them in place. Like
okay, so it's like this one. And then this is the peg.
Exactly. And the lid would just slide off.
Beautiful. Okay. So then what do people use them for, or what could we possibly use them for? I love them.
Mostly people that are purchasing them are using them as planters.
Oh, okay, so we can just put some plants in there.
Yeah, I've also seen them used as with water for lilies.
Oh, okay, so they could be watertight. Oh,
yes,
that's adventurous.
They are, because they're made of teak.
Yeah.
They're very water resistant.
Okay, great. Sherry, with this old teak, as far as care and maintenance, is it the same as new teak that you would buy?
Definitely, old and new teak is the same.
Okay.
It will definitely last longer if you keep it indoors.
Okay.
And if you put it outside to combat with the elements,
yes,
it will go to a silvery gray.
Okay, and then to prevent that silvery gray coloration, if you wanted to, you can keep the piece oiled and that
Exactly.
prevents that.
That's right. Every season you can either oil it or varnish it.
Okay. Sherry, I'm curious about these benches behind us. Which one is more traditional as opposed to, we've got the one with the wavy sort of curl to it, and then the other one is more slatted?
The style behind us is more of an original bench.
Okay.
And this is based on a contemporary design.
Oh, I see. Okay, because I prefer the one with the slatted seat, and that's the more traditional one. The other thing I wanted to ask you about were these stone carvings. You know, I'm a little bit nervous about the idea of sort of robbing the culture of a country, but can you tell me where these came from, or sort of the background? Are these, they look old.
They're newly made out of volcanic stone, or I should say hand carved from volcanic stone, based on old temple designs, but these are new. We're not stealing or pillaging from any temples.
Okay, you've been real helpful. I think what I'd like to do is take a couple of these planters, and we can probably use those to start defining some space in the garden that we're looking at. A bench and a coffee table, and then maybe these stone relics. They might come in handy somewhere. I think those would look good in this garden.
Excellent, fantastic. Well, you can definitely take them.
Thank you very much. Great. Okay, guys, let's bring the bench in first. Yeah, the little impatiens, we can bring those in. Well, let's get some reading material from Muriel. But that all looks very inviting. That's a little wonky, but that's okay. Come on in and see, Muriel.
This looks great. I love it.
Well, it's surprising. I mean, you put a couple of pillows on sort of wood furniture and suddenly it's comfortable.
Well, you're not going to believe it, but when we went to Bali for our honeymoon, we actually took a picture of the two of us sitting on the bench exactly like this, with a big bowl of fruit in front of us. And the only difference was that we had rice fields behind us, but otherwise the setting was the same pretty much.
Well, we couldn't manage the rice fields, but I'm glad to know we were on the mark with the pieces of furniture that we did pick out.
Yeah, you definitely were.
The other thing that we've introduced into the backyard are these solid wood, they look like planters. In actual fact, they're storage units. And then the other thing you might notice as you're sitting here are the stone carvings that are contemporary.
I noticed that one.
But again, they sort of bring back sort of that feel of East Asian aspects. Well, I'm glad then that we at least matched the photograph that you have of your honeymoon.
Yeah, sure did.
We've done our part of the bargain. I think now what you're going to have to do is sort of light the torches this evening before your husband comes home, and have maybe whatever you were drinking when you were on your honeymoon, bring it back and see how he responds to it all.
Great.
Coming up, this week's how-to is a functional potting stand. This fabulous stand has a place to store everything you'll need to keep your garden looking great. So stay tuned.